United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Hello and welcome and a very good afternoon to you all. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio with the stories that matter across the country. And we have plenty coming up, including a closer look at Sir Keir Starmer's 5 missions that were announced this week. Also, after Kate Forbes' comments during the race to replace Nicola Sturgeon as leader of the SNP and First Minister of Scotland, I'll be asking, should politics be more personal or perhaps less personal? All of that and much more, but first let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news. Here once again is Bethany Elsey.
Alastair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just past 1 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak says he's giving it everything to achieve a new deal over the Northern Ireland Protocol, but has insisted it's not done yet. Speaking to the Sunday Times, the Prime Minister said he's hopeful of a positive outcome with the European Union. Describing it as unfinished business, he said it's vital to ensure a return to power sharing in the province. The DUP has refused to form an executive at Stormont in protest over the current Brexit deal. MP Sammy Wilson says the party hasn't seen any proposal yet.
What we do know is that there doesn't appear to have been any deal on this central issue which affects Northern Ireland, and that is the imposition of EU law. All of the problems that we face with not able to get goods from GB, checks on goods coming from GB and disruption to our economy stems from the fact that we're under a different set of laws than the rest of the United Kingdom, and therefore checks are required to make sure we're complying not with British law but with Brussels law.
Well, former Trade Secretary Liam Fox said he would support a new post-Brexit deal if it's an improvement, and expects fellow Tory MPs and the DUP to do the same.
The DUP will also be willing to see restrictions diminished, again, in the hope that over time some of them might disappear. I think the hope that the European Union would give up entirely on European law applying to some elements in Northern Ireland is unlikely, given what the British government conceded in the protocol. But we can make progress on that, and I think that both sides will want to see the Northern Ireland Assembly up and running, because that's the best guarantee to political stability and a reduction in violence.
Police in Northern Ireland have arrested a sixth person in connection with the attempted murder of an off-duty officer in Omagh. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell was at a sports centre with his son on Wednesday when he was shot. He remains critically ill in hospital. Authorities in Italy say 45 people have died after a ship got into difficulties off the country's south coast. 27 bodies were found on a beach in the southern region of Calabria, and more have been found in the water. It's reported the boat left from Turkey and was carrying migrants from Somalia, Pakistan and Afghanistan when it crashed against rocks during rough sea weather. There were 81 survivors and 22 are in hospital. The former US National Security Advisor, John Bolton, has said he would be willing to run for the Republican nomination if it stopped Donald Trump from getting it. Mr. Bolton served under Donald Trump and was a former US ambassador to the UN. He told GB News' Camilla Tominey it was important the former president didn't win the nomination for the 2024 presidential election.
It's very important that Donald Trump not be the nominee of the Republican Party in 2024. I think he can be defeated. I'd certainly like to help out in making that happen. And if I think being a candidate myself does show a path to getting the nomination and to winning in November of next year, then I'll get in.
Social housing managers will be required to study for qualifications to drive up standards following the death of a 2-year-old boy. Awab Ishak died in December 2020 from a respiratory condition caused by mould, which was at his home in Rochdale. Housing Secretary Michael Gove announced the response after acknowledging that social housing residents are being inexcusably let down. Housing expert Richard Blanco says the move should protect vulnerable tenants, but said there's still more to be done.
One of my concerns is that, I want this to trickle down to frontline housing officers because they're often the ones that are going out and doing the visits. And indeed, I'd like to see more visits because what we've found since COVID is that a lot of the work has been done remotely and housing officers have not been going out enough to actually meet tenants and see with their own eyes what's going on.
The former Home Secretary has urged the Chancellor to halt the planned corporation tax rise in his budget next month. It's expected to increase from 19% to 25% in April. Priti Patel says now is not the time and called for an end to government interference with business. But the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says the move will make for a fairer tax system. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more news as it happens now, though. It's back to Alastair.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed, and a very good afternoon to all of you. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, sought to distinguish himself and his party from Rishi Sunak and Sunak's Conservatives in a major speech. Starmer said that Britain needs a mission-driven government to end short-term sticking plaster politics with 5 bold missions that will form the backbone of Labour's election manifesto and, if they are elected, will drive forward, Sir Keir said, a Labour government. Now, I know people are crying out for a long-term plan to give Britain back its future and to restore pride and purpose in the country, he went on to say. The targets for this ambitious set of missions were to make the United Kingdom, and I quote again, the fastest growing economy in the G7 group of largest economies around the world. Sir Keir also said that he wanted the UK to fully embrace clean energy and become a clean, green energy superpower. He said it would be a Labour mission to build an NHS, quotes, fit for the future. He also wanted to dismantle barriers to opportunity at every stage, from childhood. Well, cynics might say that it was just, as the Americans say, all apple pie and motherhood stuff. Little or nothing to disagree with there, but missing, crucially, any detail. He said his top team would come in a subsequent series of speeches, and some more from him, and, of course, the manifesto would build up on these mission statements. His Shadow Chancellor and her predecessor have long talked about other opportunities in the green economy. And on the National Health Service, as I've often said on this programme, because I believe in giving praise where praise is due, Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has said the NHS must reform or it won't survive. The growth ambition is barely different to the Conservatives, as spelt out in Sunak's 5 Pledges speech. And as always, the detail is the devil. The devil is in the detail. There is the philosophical point of just how much governments can do, especially on growth. And in a sense, that was exactly at the heart of Priti Patel's point about corporation tax. You can do things that get in the way of growth, but what you can actually do hands-on to boost growth, let alone make the United Kingdom the fastest growing of all of the G7 economies, is certainly worth a lot more debate than was given either by the Prime Minister in his pledges speech or by Sir Keir Starmer in his mission to impress the electorate speech. Levelling Up was also a kind of Tory take on removing barriers to opportunity wherever you are, and indeed whoever you are, wherever you live and wherever you work. Rishi Sunak also went on the NHS Downing Street Summit. He said that the status quo and the same solutions as before simply won't work and are no longer acceptable. So, we voters really need battle plans ahead of the election. Neither mission statements nor simple pledges of broad intent, in my humble opinion, will cut it with many of you, if any of you. And that certainly seems to be the flavour of the tweets that you've been sending in and the emails, some of which we will share back with you a little later as the programme progresses. So do keep that coming in. You can tweet me directly, or you can tweet at GB News, or you can email your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.co.uk. Now, I've invited friends from politics and journalism to chew this over with me, and we also, as I say, really want to hear your thoughts. Did the Prime Minister prod you in a positive direction with his pledges, or did Sir Keir Starmer move you with his mission statement? Is it all a bit bland and neutral? Because, as candidates for the leadership of the SNP discover, if you say what you really believe, especially if it runs contrary to the consensus on matters such as same-sex marriages and even gay parenting, you can get your fingers well and truly burned. So perhaps best to remain, relatively speaking, stumm. Ditto a senior Tory on capital punishment and food banks. So is it best to say little or nothing? Is there no longer a place in politics for faith, belief and profound thought, what you really care about and what makes you tick? I'll be speaking to a range of guests on this today, but as I say, let me say it once more time, because I really do mean it. We all want to hear what you think about the pledges, the mission statements and anything else that is playing on your mind. Email me at gbviews@gbnews.co.uk or come via Twitter. And I'm going to begin the conversation with an old chum of mine, Aubrey Allegretti, who is a political correspondent at The Guardian newspaper. Quite often on the sofa, but there he is at home, and I'm delighted, no different. Hand on heart, honest answer, did any of the mission statement from Sir Keir Starmer fire you up and get you excited, either as somebody who may or may not want a Labour government elected, but certainly somebody who follows these things with great scrutiny?
It was quite exciting to hear a bit more sort of meat on the bones. Keir Starmer is a politician who most voters would commonly associate with the phrase "don't know." However, he is on course to become Prime Minister in potentially less than 2 years.
All right, let's not fall out over this, Aubrey. What bit of detail did you spot that I missed?
Well, I think the pledge, or the national mission as it was, to try and get the highest sustained growth in the G7 is certainly one we'll be keeping an eye on. Keir Starmer is expected to make a speech early next week in which he outlines quite a bit more detail. So this was the sort of the broad bones, the kind of 5 national missions. We're going to get the first detail on the economy tomorrow. We're expecting that in the run-up to the local elections, that's when we'll hear more details about the national mission to make sure that Britain's streets are safer, when I think Labour will be focusing a lot more on crime and particularly the failure to prosecute people who've been accused of and charged with certain crimes.
Does Rachel Reeves actually believe deep down that governments can effect the rate of growth in a complex free market economy?
I believe so. I mean, Rachel Reeves is obviously a very impressive sort of shadow chancellor, and we haven't heard too much from her yet. I'm hoping that she'll be front and centre of the speech next week, where we'll hear a bit more about the plans to tackle something that Labour says goes back a very long way, all the way back to 2010, when growth has been particularly sluggish. Of course, this is something that she knows that the former Chancellor, now Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is also very keen to talk about as well. One of his 5 pledges at the start of the year was get the economy growing again. His pledges are sort of more short-term, things that he wants to achieve by the end of the year, whereas Labour's national missions are quite more sort of long-term focused. We heard that conversation between Keir Starmer and the media when he was talking about a decade of renewal. So he's clearly setting his sights on 2 terms in office. That's quite a long period of time for Labour to be able to do what it says it wants to, which is fix the fundamentals of sluggish economic growth.
I listened carefully to that answer, and 2 things strike me very forcibly, and it relates to one of the stories that was in Bethany's news bulletin just before we began our conversation, and that was the former Home Secretary Priti Patel, who also contributed to a very important pamphlet about 10 years ago about getting Britain back on track as a competitive and vibrant economy. And the Tories are having a genuine debate. Sunak's personal fingerprints are all over the increase in corporation tax, and it featured very heavily in the context between him and Liz Truss. But Patel is trying to get that debate going and forcing Sunak to come out of his cave and explain why he still thinks you can get growth in a modern mixed economy by taxing business even more.
Yes, exactly. The Conservatives know that one of the reasons they're so far behind in the polls is because they've exploded into sort of fits of introspection, if you like, over the last 12 months. And there's been this battle for the soul of the Conservative Party, which was slightly laid to rest when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. But as you say, as a former Chancellor, his hands are all over the corporation tax increase. So there are some who think there is very little sort of raison d'etre behind the Conservative Party anymore. We're not giving voters enough of a reason to go out and either vote for us or vote against the Labour Party, not stay at home. So there are people like Priti Patel who feel very strongly that they shouldn't sort of sit back, sit on their hands, not risk sort of upsetting the apple cart and just get behind the Prime Minister. They think they need to hold his feet to the fire and prove again that the Conservatives have a reason for people to go to the ballot box and put their cross in them, particularly when it comes to the sort of the issues they used to be known for, like sort of low tax and smaller states. Both of those things went out the window with Boris Johnson. So they really want to make sure that Rishi Sunak reins those things in as quickly as possible.
Do you think there was enough firepower in Starmer's speech? And I completely accept your point, and I echoed it myself in my general introduction, that there will be more detail to come in speeches from people like Wes Streeting and Rachel Reeves and Sir Keir himself to put the detail there to get it across. Do you sense that this has a chance of satisfying many of the ordinary members of the Labour Party who were absolutely pro-Corbyn, members of that faction within the Labour Party that still believes in the old way of doing things? And Starmer nods to having a state-owned British energy company to help with that green economy and the rest of it. But is that going to get the men and women who pound the pavements and stick the leaflets in envelopes out and about?
Well, absolutely. Part of the audience that he's playing to here are the members, and he has faced some very difficult questions over the last week about how he can be trusted to fulfil these national missions, given the sort of platform that he stood on when he was competing for Labour members' votes has seemingly sort of disintegrated underneath him. Now, Keir Starmer argues that, of course, situations have changed. There's a lot of different context. He pointed to example for the sort of invasion of Ukraine by Russia and saying, well, that completely changed the equation in terms of nationalised state energy. That isn't something that he now is advocating for. But it does go to, I think, the wider concerns that Labour members have that this isn't a politician necessarily who can be trusted to keep their word. Keir Starmer obviously making sure that he tries as hard as possible to prove that he does have the right to sort of earn people's trust, and he will stick as closely to that platform as possible for the membership, whilst also kind of keeping in the centre ground and making sure that he attracts a broad base of voters from across the political spectrum as possible.
All right, Aubrey Allegretti, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Aubrey Allegretti, political reporter and commentator on The Guardian newspaper. I'm delighted now to be joined by another good friend of this programme, and that is the Labour Member of Parliament for Blakely and Broughton. And it is, of course, Graham Stringer, and I'm hoping that he is there. There he is. A very, very good afternoon to you, Graham. When you heard the mission speech from Sir Keir, did it stir something in your heart?
Nothing wrong with it in general terms. I compared the 5 missions to the 5 pledges that Tony Blair made before the 1997 election, and they were very precise. They were funded commitments on class sizes for 5 to 7 year olds, on bringing down waiting lists, on improving the justice system, and so on. And I think we have to move on to that. I think the public generally distrust abstract nouns or don't listen to them. As you've already said, when you look at the abstract nouns, who's not in favour of growth in the economy, who's not in favour of a better NHS system. So I think we have to get down to detailed specifics, particularly, as you said, on what will pay for any improvement in our country and our society, which is growth in the economy.
Yes. Priti Patel made it clear in her contribution, which we've reported upon, that she's absolutely clear in her mind that governments can get in the way of growth, and you have some experience of the private sector as well as local as central government as well. Do you believe that governments can really boost growth, and that it is meaningful to say a Labour government, if elected, would make the United Kingdom the fastest sustainably growing economy in G7?
Well, that won't be entirely within our control, will it? How quickly Germany or the United States grow is not really. But getting us to grow competitively and quickly is a good thing. I agree with Priti Patel. When I was leader of Manchester, I used to say to the officials who work for me, it's a bit like medicine. First, do no harm. Make sure that our policies are not stopping investment into Manchester. And I think the same's true of the country. And these are often quite refined arguments. At the moment, that our country is very strong in biological sciences and the development of medical products, but the government have just removed some tax incentives, and some businesses are investing and moving elsewhere because they want the tax incentives. So I think those detailed micro decisions are important, and so governments can help, or they can not damage things. But on the other side, and this leads into the levelling up argument, I think what governments can do, they can provide hard and soft infrastructure which will make any businesses more competitive, because if the transport systems are good, if the communication systems, whether it's Wi-Fi or the internet, are good, then it's going to help many, many businesses to be more competitive. And on the softer side, we need a highly educated and trained workforce. So I think governments can do things in those areas.
Do you think, same question to you, because I'm genuinely intrigued to know what vibe you're picking up from your constituents, because I know you keep in touch with them, both supporters and those, because you represent everybody in your constituency, as all members of Parliament do, disregarding whether they are of the same party as you or not. But the Labour people, who you meet very regularly with, are they enthusiastic about this? Or do they say, oh, it'll be all right? because they've just seen the front page of the Independent newspaper 2 days ago saying, don't take anything for granted. And Keir seems to say that as often as he says, yes, get out there, we're going to win and we're going to restore Britain's faith in itself.
I agree with Keir that we shouldn't take anything for granted. One of the worst political mornings of my life was the morning after the 92 election, when I thought we would do better than we did. I think what I'm fairly confident about is the government, the Conservative Party, are likely to lose the next election. But I don't think we have done enough yet to guarantee winning a significant majority that will enable us to give this country a decent government. And we have to work on that and not assume things. I also listened very carefully to what you were saying about the support within the Labour Party for Keir.
Yeah.
We've got a very different Labour Party now than we had 3 years ago. 2 reasons. One, some of the people who joined from groups that had previously been outside the Labour Party have gone back into their groups and left. And some of the idealistic young people who I'm delighted joined the party, they were burnt by the scale of the defeat at the last general election. So I think they've become very realistic. And while they are realistic, they're still idealistic, but they realise we can't get there in one step. It was a big learning experience. So I think those people are still keen to get out on the doorstep, deliver leaflets enthusiastically for the Labour Party, but they don't expect quite the large leap they expected at the last general election. They are more prepared for a step-by-step progress.
Understood, which seems to be the approach of the leader as well. So that must be good news for the leader if the membership and he are in step, at least on that, if not other things as well. Graham, it's always genuinely a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for being so kind and generous with your time. Labour MP Graham Stringer, Member of Parliament for Blakely and Broughton, giving us his time this Sunday afternoon, reflecting upon the mission speech from the leader of his party. And now, delighted to welcome onto the programme the Assistant Editor of Conservative Home. And there he is, sitting quietly at his William Atkinson. William, good to see you. Thank you very, very much indeed. Going to turn the question I put to Aubrey and to Graham on its head for you. Did you hear anything in Sir Keir's mission speech that filled you with fear, as someone who clearly is a supporter, albeit not uncritical supporter of the Conservative Party?
No, not really. It was meaningless fluff. This is Keir Starmer's 11th rebrand. And as Graham Stringer points out, these various commitments that he made were largely impossible to verify and very difficult to deliver in government. And a lot of them didn't actually apply to any specific policy proposals. And as I say, this is Keir Starmer's 11th rebrand. I more than expect that he will have a 12th in the next 3 or 4 months, accompanied by a very similar speech, which will, in the same vein, lay out no actual plans and constructive ideas for what he's actually going to deliver in government.
One of the big criticisms.
Quite useful.
Sorry, let me just butt in for balance sake. One of the big criticisms that was made of Rishi's 5 pledges speech, which I also put in the frame in my introduction to all of these conversations, was not so much that it lacked detail of how it would be achieved, when he said he would get growth going again, he would get national debt declining, etc., etc. It was that he was clinging to things that were almost certainly going to happen anyway. Inflation would come crashing down quite sharply this financial year, and that there would be a trickle of growth returning, and with it, by definition, borrowing and debt would come back a little bit. To bank the inevitable is not exactly imaginative or inspiring leadership, is it?
Well, I wouldn't say that leadership has to necessarily be imaginative or inspiring. I'd say Boris Johnson is a much more imaginative and inspiring speaker.
It does matter if your back is electorally up against the wall.
Pardon? Sorry, Alastair,
I said it does matter if electorally your back is against the wall, which it certainly is in the case of your party and personally in the case of Mr. Sunak.
Yes, but I don't think people are necessarily looking for exciting government. I think people have had more than enough of exciting politics over the last few years. And actually, perhaps Keir Starmer's greatest selling point is that he is so bland and boring. And it's the same with Rishi Sunak. But the difference is that Rishi Sunak actually has experience of government. And he has set himself 5 goals, which are actually possible to deliver if he strips all the barnacles off the boat and focuses the government machine primarily on delivering those. The trouble that Keir Starmer has is that he himself has no actual experience of government as a minister, and neither do most of his top team. And the thing that Tony Blair found after several years in government was actually his greatest opponent was not Gordon Brown or even the Tories. It was actually the government machine itself. And it took him 2 terms in government to actually work out what he wanted to do and actually how to deliver it, primarily things like academies or public service reform more broadly. And Keir Starmer's speech suggests that he's done no thinking about how he's actually going to deliver anything in government. And has said, as we've previously seen with Keir Starmer, he's more than willing to say one thing in opposition or one thing when he's running for an election, but with no actual intention to stick to it when he's actually as leader or in government. I'm thinking previously about his enthusiasm for rejoining the European Union or his defence of Jeremy Corbyn's record. So as I say, this speech was, political ephemera, and I expect that it will be replaced by something very similar in a couple of months, 3 or 4 months, when Labour have their latest rebrand.
William, a very quick one, if you would be so kind. I suggested to Michael Portillo about half an hour ago that the Northern Ireland Protocol was allowing us to see a slightly different Rishi Sunak. He'd really come out fighting, and the Telegraph splash headline, Sunak snubs Johnson over new Brexit deal. We're seeing a little bit of leadership and a little bit of pushing hard on things from Sunak rather than just sitting back and letting it all happen around him.
I would say Rishi Sunak sits back and allows things to happen. He is a much more hard-working Prime Minister than Johnson ever was, for example. And he's diligently working away across various pretty serious issues, including primarily the small boats crisis. Sure. But I think certainly with this one, it is a dividing line within the Conservative Party. And I think those who oppose him on the backbenchers need to realise that Keir Starmer is only ever going to deliver a much worse deal on Northern Ireland than Rishi Sunak ever would. And Rishi Sunak's priority right now is to get a deal across the line so that he can stop focusing on this and start focusing on the sort of things that will actually win the Tories the next election. So I'm very glad that he's prioritised this issue. But yes, nevertheless, it's going to cause an awful lot of a ruckus within the Tory party over the next couple of weeks.
William, a pleasure talking to you, and thanks for sharing your insights and knowledge of these matters. That's William Atkinson, the assistant editor at Conservative Home, one of the most, if not the most influential Conservative website, which is always willing to support the government when it believes it's appropriate and put the boot in with mighty clout when it thinks that is equally appropriate. So thank you for your time, William. You're watching, listening to Alastair, Stewart and Friends, with lots more coming up on today's programme, including across England alone. There are as many as 225 national nature reserves, but the criteria to gain that status has just changed to make these spaces more accessible to the general public. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper will have that story for us, but first we're going to take a quick break.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back to GB News. It's 1:33. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories. Rishi Sunak says he's giving it everything to achieve a new deal over the Northern Ireland Protocol, but has insisted it's not done yet. Speaking to the Sunday Times, the Prime Minister said he's hopeful of a positive outcome with the European Union. Describing it as unfinished business, though, he said it's vital to ensure a return to power sharing in the province. The DUP has refused to form an executive at Stormont in protest over the current Brexit deal. MP Sammy Wilson says the party hasn't seen any proposal yet.
What we do know is that there doesn't appear to have been any deal on this central issue which affects Northern Ireland, and that is the imposition of EU law. All of the problems that we face with not able to get goods from GB, checks on goods coming from GB and disruption to our economy stems from the fact that we're under a different set of laws than the rest of the United Kingdom, and therefore checks are required to make sure we're complying not with British law but with Brussels law.
Authorities in Italy say 45 people have died after a ship got into difficulty off the country's south coast. 27 bodies were found on a beach in the southern region of Calabria, and more have been found in the water. It's reported the boat left from Turkey and was carrying migrants from Somalia, Pakistan and Afghanistan when it crashed against rocks during rough sea weather. There are 81 survivors, with 22 in hospital. Social housing managers will be required to study for qualifications to drive up standards following the death of a 2-year-old boy. Awab Ishak died in December 2020 from a respiratory condition, which was caused by mould at his home in Rochdale. The Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, announced the response after acknowledging that social housing residents are being inexcusably let down. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair.
The Rural Spotlight is one of my favourite bits of this programme, and we've managed to give you 2 bites of that particular cherry today. The first is this. Across England alone, there are as many as 225 national nature reserves, but the criteria to gain that national nature reserve status has just changed to make these spaces more accessible to the general public. Our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, paid a visit to the first area to become an NNR under these new guidelines. Here's her report.
The flashes of Wigan and Lee. Once the site for several of the county's coal mines, the area is now home to many of the region's flora and fauna.
Wigan and Lee is an area famous for its involvement in Britain's industrial revolution, but now it's having its own ecological revolution as an area the size of almost 1,000 rugby league pitches has been made into a national nature reserve.
What we've got to do is we've got to bring wildlife back to landscapes where it's been lost. And I think the Wigan and Lee flashes, it's just such an inspiring example, because this is a landscape this was black in the 1950s and 1960s. There was mining still going on here into the 1990s.
A scheme formerly focused purely on conservation and research, Wigan and Lee is the first to become an NNR under a new set of criteria.
What the new criteria are about really is recognising the importance for people. This is a place where you've literally got terraced streets backing onto incredible wildlife habitats. and we've got 300,000 people within a couple of minutes, cycle ride. That's an absolutely incredible resource. So to recognise that nationally, that was part, I guess, of why this designation is so special, and it's brilliant for the people of Wigan and Lee.
But it won't just benefit the local people. This nationally significant project will also provide protected habitats for many iconic British species.
So there's about 800 hectares of mixed willow and reed bed and meadows and grasslands. So it's really important for a range of species such as bittern, water rail, hare, and our favourite, the willow tip.
Deemed in urgent need of help, 2.5% of the UK's willow tip population will now be protected by the site's NNR status. So, it's good for the animals, it's good for the people. What about good for the environment?
So the nature reserve is around about 2 degrees cooler than the surrounding urban land. So that's really good in helping to keep the area cool, and the habitats, the trees, the grasslands, the reed beds and the mosslands that we have in this area are all sequestering carbon, making it much better for the sort of carbon equation, taking that carbon dioxide out of the air.
With huge benefits across the board, the flashes of Wigan and Lee have been truly transformed. From a heartland of smoke and coal into a hub for wildlife to flourish. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Absolutely brilliant there from Sophie Reaper, and how inspired to use the size of a rugby league pitch as an analogy for the scale of that brilliant area. But as Sophie's guests pointed out, don't forget, it's there for you, as are all of the nature reserves, so do use them, and if you do use them, cherish them and respect them, and leave them as you found them. Don't leave any of your litter or anything like that, because otherwise they won't do the job of work that they are designed to do, which is to make your life better and more pleasurable, but also to sustain and support the flora and fauna, as Sophie quite rightly described it there in those wonderful areas. So there we are. That's our first quick flash of the Rural Spotlight. I hope you found it interesting. I loved every moment of it and every frame of picture. Now, on our big topic about whether the leader of the Conservative Party, or more importantly in this context, the leader of the Labour Party, are cutting through with their pledge speeches and their mission statements. We've been discussing it so far, and I asked you overnight to send your thoughts in, and as always, you've risen to that challenge, and thank you very much indeed. Let's start with Kenneth, who says, they haven't got a plan on anything. James says, Labour will definitely be in office in the next election. Tory Remainers will tear the party apart. Steve says Labour will win the next election by a large majority. SNP will lose seats in Scotland to the Labour Party, and the Conservative Party will, quite rightly, have a big reset. David says, I know the Tories have made a proper disaster in government, but I think they can turn it round. Labour and Starmer would be a total disaster for the whole nation. Mike says, if we think we're in a bad place now, it will only get worse under a Labour government. Bridget says, under no circumstances should Sir Keir Starmer and his Labour Party be elected. So do keep your views coming in, and I'll try and keep the selection as balanced as I possibly can. And I promise you that was broadly balanced in terms of the volumes of both sides of the argument. You can affect that by keeping your voice coming in, and I will share the best before we go off air in an hour or so's time. Also, if you missed the other contributions to this reflective moment, you can, of course, catch up on all of them and previous programmes as well by subscribing to our YouTube channel. We are, surprise, surprise, at GB News. So that's on YouTube. And you're watching and listening to Alastair, Stewart and friends here on GB News, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including in our second flash of the Rural Spotlight, we'll be looking at the shortage of fruit and veg in supermarkets. Just what is causing this, and what are these solutions? I'll be talking to two very special guests next, but first, a quick break.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Welcome back. You're watching Alastair, Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio and online. And thank you very much indeed for so doing. Our second flash, pardon my language, of the Rural Spotlight will remind you, as I'm sure many of you are keenly and perhaps even painfully aware, that there is currently a fruit and vegetable shortage at most of the major supermarkets. You may struggle to find items such as tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, various types of lettuce. It is apparently due to bad weather in Europe, particularly in Spain and in North Africa as well, Morocco, where many of those vegetable items come from, and the idea of it being as snowy in Morocco as it is in the Alps at the moment is quite extraordinary. But there we are. That is what's going on. Normally, the supermarkets, who are some of the sharpest and keenest traders in the UK economy, do things like buy one and get one free. And now they're saying buy one and that's your lot if it's a cucumber. Of course, if you shop around, there are other ideas as well. We'll be discussing some of those. One thing we can't do anything about is energy costs, and we can't do anything about the weather across Europe or in North Africa. Growers here are saying that shortages could last until May, so even suddenly a surge in growth is going to take some time because that's the nature of agriculture. Meanwhile, the supermarkets have been bringing in limits so that customers can only purchase a certain number of fruit and veg items. They haven't said how long that is going to last. I'm delighted to welcome onto the programme now for the first time Abi Reader. Abi's the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union for Cymru, Wales, and is also a farmer herself from a farming family in Wales. Lovely to see you, and I make a confession. I saw you on a competitor news programme and thought, blimey, what an excellent spokesperson for an industry I care passionately about and support. And I saw you there feeding your cattle, and I just wondered whether you had any serious concerns, because you didn't say it in the interview, that meat products and milk could be the next thing that we face a shortage of, and that we may even have to endure rationing of.
Afternoon, Alastair. Thanks very much. Yes, we do have concerns about meat and milk as well. As part of the National Farmers Union here in Wales and throughout England, we've screened our members, and up to 50% of farmers are anticipating that they will cut back this year because of rising costs of production. So it is very concerning.
The most common criticism I hear from farmers, I live down in Hampshire and I spend a fair old bit of time chatting to them and bump into them socially and the rest of it, is quite simply articulated, and that is that the government doesn't know whether agriculture is an industry that exists primarily to produce food for our consumption at home and, where possible, for export as well. I mean, you're a classic example of that, being a meat producer as well as a milk producer, and some of the finest British beef does go to export. We're keenly aware of that. But in the old days, we had George Eustace, who himself at least was a farmer, and he was Secretary of State for the Environment and looked after farming as well. Therese Coffey is the new Environment Secretary and got her fingers burnt over turnips recently, although I would stand out here and make a cri de coeur that root vegetables make very fine soup, apart from also accompanying products that you produce. So let's hear it for turnips, and let's not knock turnips at all. Are there any things that the government can do to see off those shortages and make sure that you and colleagues don't have to do it in terms of meat and don't have to do it in terms of milk?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the aspiration the government needs to have is not to allow food production to drop any lower. So it's brilliant to have these environmental goals, and we saw earlier, nature reserves and all those things out there that can protect our environment, but we must protect food production. We've got a growing population. We're in considerably turbulent geopolitical times at the moment, and we are having issues with trade. So we need to protect that domestic production. And more than that, we've got a duty to protect that domestic production, because we need to make sure that we don't see these shortages on the shelves that we're seeing at the moment. And I think the other key thing, at present, we're seeing a lack of confidence from our farmers. And a lot of that is to do with lack of support for rising prices, but also it's linked to farm support payments and the fact that they are dropping. Now, these support payments are there to make sure that farmers can get through the good and the bad times so that we have that constant supply of food. And if the support is going to be reducing, then you are going to start to see less confidence from our producers and less aspiration to invest for the future.
So as far as the NFU in Wales and indeed across the rest of the United Kingdom are concerned, once the Prime Minister has sorted out the deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol, the next crucial bit of unfinished business is the post-Brexit settlement with the farming industry.
That's right. We need a full inventory on how much food we are capable of producing, and we need to make sure we protect it and enhance it and enable farmers to meet the net zero goals or the environmental goals or whatever it may be. But we must protect food production as well. It's absolutely vital.
I'm going to offer you an open goal because I'm a really nice person, but also because I genuinely do believe in it passionately, and we do it whenever we can do. The other thing is appeal not only to government but to consumers to be smarter and shop around. And farmers market, and even some farmers sell produce at their gates. I don't know if you do that with your milk. I know a number of milk farmers do. But shop around, use farmers markets, go to local vegetable suppliers. Think smart. You get good deals, and there's a lot of produce out there that you can consume.
Yeah, absolutely. And farmers love to see the people that are buying their food. We love to be able to tell you what we're doing to showcase our amazing produce. So, please do go along to these and make sure that you offer your support. It'd be great.
Abby Reader, I hope we can consider you now a friend of the programme. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for accepting my invitation to come on and chat about the industry in Wales and more generally than that. Look forward to next time we meet up. Abby Reader, thank you very much indeed. Abby is the Deputy President of the National Farmers Union in Wales, Cymru, and as I said at the beginning, herself is a hands-on farmer producing cattle meat and producing milk. Now, I mentioned farmers' markets. I also mentioned self-sufficiency and smart consumers. I'm delighted to welcome, with that very much in mind, my next guest, who is Terry Dickinson. And Terry, there he is. Terry is the London representative at the National Allotment Society, which has some genuinely extraordinary and very high-profile supporters, including the former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, the deputy editor and former political editor of the New Statesman magazine, Isabel Hardman, and the former sports minister and Tory MP down in Kent, Tracy Crouch. It's such a brilliant idea. You have a waiting list as long as your arm, don't you?
Estimate 90,000 people around the UK waiting to get onto allotments. 17,000 in London, and they're growing. Allotments should be expanded. There's land available. There's allotments that have become underused, it has to be said. And councils should be given the money. Local authorities should be funded to bring back underused parts of allotments, which they now find too expensive to restore because of the from the 60s onwards, allotments use dropped, but now it's coming back. There is land out there. There is allotment land out there, and local authorities should be helped.
And overwhelmingly, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right in saying this, overwhelmingly, the existing allotments that are really work very hard and help people keep their sanity and keep themselves healthy and therefore take pressure off the NHS as well, and hurrah for that, overwhelmingly are means of producing your own vegetables. That's the most common produce that comes out of an allotment.
Yeah, for yourself, and you swap it with your family and your friends. You swap it around the allotment. Allotments are more, they might look higgledy-piggledy, but that's their charm. That's why they're so good. Crops are intercropped. It's not a monoculture. Produce levels are much higher than agricultural monoculture. It's astounding what a good grower can get out of an allotment. After all said and done, the original size of the original allotment was thought up because that would feed a family for 4 people throughout the year. For people in this country, I'm from the generation where we probably didn't have many tomatoes in the winter time. People have kind of lost the seasonality a bit. We've got all our chefs on the television telling us about cooking seasonality. We should listen to them a bit more. There are fabulous things available in our winter, and we should cut down on our food imports. More than 70% of our food and veg is imported, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know,
Can I agree with you on that score as well, but just to tie that observation in with your confirmation that there is a long waiting list if you want to go down the allotment road, you can also go down the road of a big old terracotta pot. And my wife grew brilliant tomatoes this last summer in just a big old pot outside our back door. And they were just lovely. A, to eat, and B, to look at.
It's exactly. I grow tomatoes on the patio for the grandchildren to look at. I grow peppers on the patio for the grandchildren to look at. It's easy. It's easy. It's not difficult. You can grow potatoes in pots in your back garden. It's not difficult. It just needs. And as for, we need to get back. Allotment holders are good, but we need to improve on the successional sowing. You do tendency to see some plots not used during the winter when we can get back to sowing and growing through the winter. There's plenty of crops that will grow through.
Well, let's hope in your case that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is listening, or if not to me and you, then maybe Jeremy Corbyn can whisper in his ear and let's get some more allotments going in London and indeed across the country. Terry Dickinson, a real pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for being there at home, talking to me on GB News rather than up there on the allotment, digging away and growing fruit and vegetables for your lovely family. Terry, great to talk to you and keep in touch. Thank you very much indeed. Terry Dickinson, the London representative at the National Allotment Society. And if you are in local government and listening to this conversation, listen to what he said. It makes sense for the economy, for the environment and for families up and down the country. Let's have more allotments and cut those waiting lists. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and old friends and new, I'm delighted to say, with lots more still coming up on the programme this afternoon, including our discussion of whether politics should be personal. I'll be asking my top lineup of guests if personal views should be made public following Kate Forbes' comments about gay marriages this week. But first, let's bring you up to date with the all-important weather.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest forecast from the Met Office. Looking ahead for much of the week, it's going to be dry and settled. There will be a few showers at times though, pushing in from the North Sea. And the reason for this is high pressure is in charge. It remains over the UK right through the week ahead, keeping it largely dry, though with a northeasterly breeze, a few showers will feed in, particularly across eastern areas. Through the rest of Sunday, we'll see clearing skies across much of central southern England and Wales, allowing a patchy frost to form. Northern England into Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, we'll see a bit more cloud here as we move into the early hours, the risk of a few showers. Scotland also seeing those clear skies. Temperatures falling to -7, -8 across the glens of Scotland. Under the cloud, 3 or 4 degrees, and then a patchy frost also under the clear skies in the southwest. Cloud across eastern areas will push its way south and westwards quite quickly Monday morning, turning the skies quite grey, the risk of 1 or 2 light showers. Best of the sunshine holding on across northwestern parts of Scotland. There will be a few glimmers of bright or sunny spells elsewhere, but rather cloudy afternoon to come. Temperatures similar, 7 to 9 Celsius, so generally around average, perhaps if we get any sunshine in the southeast, creeping towards 10. Into the evening and overnight, Monday into Tuesday morning, we'll see variable amounts of cloud, probably more cloud compared to recent nights across England and Wales, meaning less risk of a widespread frost here. Perhaps under any clear spells, a patchy frost forming, staying quite cloudy for Northern Ireland. Clearer skies across Scotland, where temperatures once again falling below freezing. Towns and cities holding up a little bit higher compared to recent nights for the vast majority of us. So it does mean Tuesday will be a cloudier start to the day. Risk of showers moving in from the North Sea, perhaps a more organised band of rain and some hill snow moving into southeast England. One area to watch over the next few days, but largely staying dry. Temperatures generally around average. See you again soon.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. I'm Alastair Stewart and we're into the second and final hour of our programme today. Hello and welcome back, and thank you very much indeed if you have been with us since kick-off. I'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio with plenty more still to come, including off the back of the SNP leadership hopeful Kate Forbes' stance on gay marriage. This week I'll be asking, should politics be a little more personal, or should people keep their own views strictly to themselves and keep their heads down below the parapet? Before we get to that, let's bring you right up to date with all of the latest news. Here once again is Bethany Elsey.
Alastair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak says he's giving it everything to achieve a new deal over the Northern Ireland Protocol, but has insisted it's not done yet. Speaking to the Sunday Times, the Prime Minister said he's hopeful of a positive outcome with the European Union. Describing it as an unfinished business, though, he said it's vital to ensure a return to power sharing in the province. The DUP has refused to form an executive at Stormont in protest over the current Brexit deal. And MP Sammy Wilson says the party hasn't even seen a proposal yet.
What we do know is that there doesn't appear to have been any deal on this central issue which affects Northern Ireland, and that is the imposition of EU law. All of the problems that we face with not able to get goods from GB, checks on goods coming from GB, and disruption to our economy stems from the fact that we're under a different set of laws than the rest of the United Kingdom, and therefore checks are required to make sure we're complying not with British law but with Brussels law.
Well, former Trade Secretary Liam Fox said he would support the new Brexit deal if it's an improvement, and expects fellow Tory MPs and the DUP to do the same.
DUP will also be willing to see restrictions diminished, again, in the hope that over time some of them might disappear. I think the hope that the European Union would give up entirely on European law applying to some elements in Northern Ireland is unlikely, given what the British government conceded in the protocol. But we can make progress on that, and I think that both sides will want to see the Northern Ireland Assembly up and running, because that's the best guarantee to political stability and a reduction in violence.
Authorities in Italy say 45 people have died after a ship got into difficulty off the country's south coast. 27 bodies were found on a beach in the southern region of Calabria, and more have been found in the water. It's reported the boat left from Turkey and was carrying migrants from Somalia, Pakistan and Afghanistan when it crashed against rocks during rough sea weather. There are 81 survivors, with 22 of them in hospital. Police in Northern Ireland have arrested a sixth person in connection with the attempted murder of an off-duty officer in Omagh. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell was at a sports centre with his son on Wednesday when he was shot. He remains critically ill in hospital. The former US National Security Advisor John Bolton has said he would be willing to run for the Republican nomination if it stopped Donald Trump from getting it. Mr. Bolton served under Donald Trump and was a former US ambassador to the UN. He told GB News' Camilla Tominey it was important the former president didn't win the nomination for the 2024 election.
Very important that Donald Trump not be the nominee of the Republican Party in 2024. I think he can be defeated. I'd certainly like to help out in making that happen. And if I think being a candidate myself does show a path to getting the nomination and to winning in November of next year, then I'll get in.
Labour is calling for ministers to label the Wagner Group as a terror organisation. The shadow Foreign and Home Secretaries are accusing the Russian mercenary group of being a terror outfit which commits appalling atrocities. Members have been fighting alongside the Russian military in areas of eastern Ukraine. Social housing managers will be required to study for qualifications to drive up standards following the death of a 2-year-old boy. Awab Ishak died in December 2020 from a respiratory condition caused by mould at his home in Rochdale. The Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, announced the response after acknowledging that social housing residents are being inexcusably let down. Housing expert Richard Blanco says the move should protect vulnerable tenants, but there's more still to be done.
One of my concerns is that, I want this to trickle down to frontline housing officers, because they're often the ones that are going out and doing the visits. And indeed, I'd like to see more visits, because what we've found since COVID is that a lot of the work has been done remotely, and housing officers have not been going out enough to actually meet tenants and see with their own eyes what's going on.
You're up to date on GB News now, though. It's back to Alastair.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed. Last week, the First Minister of Scotland and the SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, announced that she would be stepping down from both posts. One goes with the other, and that the race to be the new leader was thrown wide open and has indeed now begun. Kate Forbes, Ash Regan and Humza Yousaf have all thrown their hats into the ring and indeed have secured sufficient backing in terms of nominations and seconds and the rest of it to get on to the ballot paper. However, there have been bumps in the road already as Kate Forbes opened up about her views on children being born out of wedlock, about gay marriage and about womanhood generally. She admitted that her own religious views may sink her campaign. Meanwhile, Humza Yousaf is facing criticism perhaps of a more traditional nature for his report on NHS COVID recovery plans. Additionally, A&E waiting times in Scotland are now up to 60 hours in parts of Scotland, and the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross has said that Yousaf should be sacked, not promoted or considered for leadership of the party. I'll be speaking to a range of guests on all of this, and we want to hear from you as well. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can go on to social media and share those views, and I'll share back the best before we go off air. I am delighted to welcome a man I greatly admire, Professor Sir John Curtis, who I always describe as the pollster's pollster, and there he is joining me from his home. And thanks, John, for breaking into your weekend to share some time with us. Can I just start with a couple of quick ones on the pledges speech at the New Year, turn of the new year, from the Prime Minister, and the mission statement now from the leader of the opposition? Are we in an era of bland leadership, and this is not really the stuff of clear blue water or embracing the white-hot heat of the technological revolution or Labour isn't working, all that kind of stuff? This is very neutral, vanilla stuff.
Yeah, there are two aspects to it that I would agree with you that give it that flavour. One is the fact that I think under Rishi Sunak, the Conservatives are edging a little bit towards the centre, at least on economic issues, not necessarily on social issues. I think apart from the pledge about the boats, I don't think there's anything for anybody very much to disagree with. We all want the health service to be better. We all want the economy to grow. We all want inflation to fall. Equally, it's very clear that Sir Keir Starmer, having campaigned for Labour leadership by taking a fairly leftist centre stance, is now moving his party very firmly back towards the centre.
Yes.
And is in some senses emulating the trajectory of Tony Blair. So that's one way in which, as it were, the politics become rather more bland. But the one thing that's occupying the centre doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot come up with a clear message that conveys what you're about to voters. I mean, Tony Blair, after all, came up with things can only get better, and that just encapsulated the idea that the current then Conservative administration was making a mess of things in Labour's view, and that Labour offered the prospect of something better. What neither Rishi Sunak nor Sir Keir Starmer seem to be very good at is coming up with that pithy phrase that gives voters a very clear, simple message that it explains, what their 5 tests are meant to add up to. And that, I think, is still very much missing on both sides of the political fence. So yes, parties in the centre who aren't that good at communicating what they're about don't necessarily make for exciting politics.
You touched on something there which actually Graham Stringer, Labour MP, mentioned when I talked to him about this a little earlier. And perhaps I underestimated it because you've mentioned it as one of your main points, and so too did Graham. And that is that Starmer's capacity, as it were, to cleanse Labour post-Corbyn is really gold dust in terms of the general public's view of this man. And he said that as it were, some of the loonies, the pro-Corbyn lot, had gone home. They'd gone back to whence they came from, and that meant that Labour could be a grown-up party again and focus much more sharply on the business of governing and answering those key questions that his constituents had about the cost of living and how are things going to get better for me.
Well, I mean, in terms of positioning, certainly Labour have moved towards the centre. One of the criticisms, of course, however, of Sir Keir Starmer's speech last week in Manchester was that when it came to the question of how you're going to achieve this, shall we say, there wasn't an awful lot of specificity. And one of the criticisms of Labour under Sir Keir's leadership has been a deep reluctance to say very much in detail about policy, about how things are going to be implemented. And, the truth is that, I mean, yes, Jeremy Corbyn in the end, certainly for the 2019 election, the fact that he ended up being perhaps, ironically, the last person in Britain who wasn't willing to take a stand in one direction or another on Brexit certainly proved to be his undoing. I think that one needs to remember that while Sir Keir Starmer, unlike Jeremy Corbyn, people can imagine him being in 10 Downing Street. They think it's acceptable that he should be in Downing Street. And given the difficulties of the Conservatives in the last 15 months over Partygate and then Liz Truss's administration, many voters have decided to switch to the Labour Party under Sir Keir Starmer. But Sir Keir's personal popularity is not that great, basically, for one person who thinks he's doing okay. There's another one who still has doubt, and he doesn't have anything like the popularity that Tony Blair had before he became Prime Minister in 1997.
Let me use Tony Blair and Alastair Campbell as a bridge to my next chunk of conversation, John, and that is Campbell said of Blair, "We don't do God." Do you wonder if turning our attentions to the SNP, if Kate Forbes perhaps wished that she hadn't, quote, done God by sharing her personal conviction beliefs about sexuality, about gay marriages, about children being born out of wedlock and gay couples bringing up children? I mean, I personally think it would be a huge shame for our politics if people like Kate could not say what they genuinely believe and profoundly believe in.
Well, I mean, certainly she certainly gave a straight answer to some straight questions. Of course, the fascinating thing is, why did journalists decide to ask these questions in the first place, which in part was, of course, that I think they thought they knew what the answers were going to be. Because, I mean, Kate Forbes has long been very upfront about her Christian faith. She's very much at the evangelical end of Presbyterianism. She belongs to the so-called Free Church of Scotland, which, very much believes in a literal reading of the Bible. And she'd opened up in a political thinking broadcast with Nick Robinson on the BBC, and it very much opened up about a sense that, she feels that she follows Jesus Christ and he is her personal saviour, etc., etc. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons. The other reason, of course, is because of the whole row of the Gender Recognition Act. The question of social issues and cultural values has been part of the currency of Scottish politics. Now, I think the answer to your question is probably twofold. One is, I think she probably regrets some of the way in which her views were expressed and they came across, because clearly, for example, for those people who are in a same-sex relationship, who are now married and have taken advantage of that law, some of them clearly do feel offended by what she said. On the other hand, I suspect, that her personal conviction is such that she was never, ever going to duck this question. And in a sense, to that extent, at least, she was always going to have to be willing to survive this storm. I think the problem more broadly for the SNP is I don't think it's going to be in the SNP's interest as a party for us to spend the remaining 4 weeks of the leadership contest talking about cultural issues. The big, big question facing the SNP is, can they find the intellectual case and the powerful voice that would enable the party to convince a majority of people in Scotland that independence is a good idea? And at the moment, at least, the whole agenda of this leadership campaign has been hijacked very much away from that crucial question for the party.
Absolutely. John, always a pleasure. So informative as well. Thank you very much indeed for your time this Sunday afternoon. Professor Sir John Curtis from the University of Strathclyde. As I say, the pollsters, having just spent the last 3 minutes demonstrating precisely why. Now, next up, I'm delighted to say Andrea Williams has agreed to join us for... Andrea Williams, who is the founder of Christian Concern, to join in this conversation. I put my cards on the table there, and I don't want to get into a debate as such about the merits of what Kate said she believed in, and as John Curtis just said, she's always believed that. She's a wee free, as they say in Scotland, but Margaret Thatcher had a Lord Chancellor who was also a wee free, so it doesn't preclude being an effective senior minister, let alone a leader. What I want to ask you is whether you think politics would be an even poorer place than it now is if folk were not confident enough to express what their deeply held views were on these essentially moral issues and social issues, which many of us feel very strongly about, whether we be fundamentalist Protestants or Roman Catholics or Muslims or Jews. Politics, I think, would be a poorer place if folk like Kate didn't say what she really believed.
Absolutely. And isn't it wonderful to, in some ways, to have someone who's given a straight answer to a straight question? And of course, everyone comes to politics with some personal view. And Kate has come and brought to politics an unashamed view, an unashamed belief in Jesus Christ, in Christianity. And she said that shapes the whole of the way that she does life. And indeed, I've just come from church this morning, and there it was wonderful to hear of the way in which Jesus Christ served so much that he laid down his life for every person. And the motivation of those of us that follow Jesus is to love him, but also to really love our neighbour and to do justice, to do what is right, to serve the community. And what Kate Forbes has done, of course, here is to explain very clearly and without being ashamed what her moral beliefs are. But wouldn't it be a shame if we didn't know the truth about her? She's been unapologetic about it.
No, as I say, I didn't want to get into an argument whether she's right or wrong. And there are two sides to the argument, clearly. I have a gay couple that we are very, very close to. One of them did not want to go down the road of a civil partnership and wanted to wait until they were able to get married because they happen to believe in church as well. And they were patient and they got their way. So hurrah for that. But I agree with your point that I'm glad she spoke openly, and it is a debate that needs to be resolved, although I happen to agree with John Curtis that probably there are bigger issues that need to be resolved in Scottish politics just now. In your view, will it mean any of these policies will be revisited in Scottish politics?
Well, I think that in some ways you're right, and certainly with the SNP being the SNP, the issue that defines their party is, of course, Scottish nationalism. And Sir John Curtis, indeed yourself, have just said that this would be the most important issue. Well, it's certainly the issue around which that party coalesces. But what society is talking about and what society has been talking about is some of these critical social issues. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be male and female? What is marriage? When and how should we have children? How should we educate our children? So the truth is we can't escape these moral and these social issues which define us as a society, which indeed politically and socially will define communities. And so I think that these issues can't help but surface again. They might diminish in the next couple of weeks around this election, but they will keep on coming back, because indeed with Nicola Sturgeon, what was interesting, we've not been surprised, I don't think, about the fact that Kate Forbes has been asked her personal views because of her expressed Christian faith. But I think that what generally society isn't used to seeing is Nicola Sturgeon, as a progressive liberal, being made to make a case for her views on transgenderism, and that was, of course, what seemed to be the catalyst to her stepping down. So I think these issues.
I think you're on the money there, Andrea. And we've not met before, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this initial conversation, and I hope that we can do it again sometime. Thank you very much indeed for breaking into your Sunday, and I'm glad you've got to go to church first. Well done, you. Andrew Williams there, who's the founder of Christian Concern. Joining me, I'm delighted to say, to round this terrific conversation off, is an old friend of mine as well. There she is, Jo Phillips, political commentator. I wasn't being silly when I said about a terrific conversation, because I genuinely think it matters. And David Steele was not going with the mainstream when he set out to reform the abortion laws back in the 60s. He came under an awful lot of criticism for it, but he stood his ground because he believed it to be right. Ditto Roy Jenkins for Labour, and those initial nibbles at gay rights, the age of consent and so on and so forth. And they both went on to great things and became towering figures of politics. Sometimes men and women who want to make a mark have to say what they really believe in and stand by it. So hurrah for Kate, or Kate, learn the lesson and bite your bottom lip a wee bit.
No, I think hurrah for Kate, Alastair. And I think, it has been a fascinating conversation. Not least of all, you started off with your conversation with John Curtis, talking about Keir Starmer and the cleansing of the Labour Party. Now, we're having a conversation about Kate Forbes's belief at the same time that Luciana Berger, the Jewish MP, has announced that she's going to rejoin the Labour Party because the Labour Party has been found independently to be rid, thank goodness, of anti-Semitism, which flourished under Jeremy Corbyn. Now, I think it's really interesting, and the letters that I'm sure you've seen between Keir Starmer and Luciana Berger are heartfelt, they're personal, they're really important, and I think they reinforce what you've just said about this standing by your beliefs. You and I remember Ruth Kelly, Labour Secretary of State in various ministries, very, very staunch Catholic, member of Opus Dei, which caused quite a lot of controversy at the time. People have to make up their own minds about Kate Forbes. I mean, she's way ahead in the polls, which John Curtis probably could have shed far more light on than I can. But she is ahead in the polls. She's been very honest. She's been very frank. She's said she wouldn't have voted for gay marriage. And I think people who will have the chance to vote for her within the Scots Nats can then make up their own mind. I mean, we've got a very uncomfortable relationship with religion in this country, I think. And in fact, the Liberal Democrat former leader, Tim Farron, who is also a devout Christian, wrote quite interestingly about this a few days ago. And he said he had to stand down as leader because he felt that there was too much conflict between his Christianity and the calls on him as a leader. And I think, why did Alastair Campbell say we don't do God? Because he knew that people find it slightly uncomfortable. You know, you can talk to people about their sex lives, you can talk to people about how much their house is worth, but you can't really talk about religion and belief. And we get a little bit, oh, that's a bit odd. So I think it's refreshing that Kate Forbes, who's a young woman, she's a very accomplished parliamentarian from what I've seen. She stepped in at the last moment to deliver the budget speech and did it with great aplomb. Whether or not the SNP will decide that's who they want as a leader, and whether indeed the faith that has shaped her would then have an input or a disproportionate input, if I may say, into future SNP policy is a question we don't know the answer to. But I think John Curtis made the point, actually, you know, the SNP are facing much bigger questions than we three.
We have to pause it there, Joe, but as I said to previous guests as well, I've really enjoyed it, and I'm deeply honoured by the fact that you said you thought it had been a good conversation across the spectrum as well. As you know, because you've been kind enough to be here so many times, it is genuinely what we try to do here, shed light on things that matter, and we are all agreed that politics would be a poorer place if people of firm conviction and belief felt excluded from it because of journalism colleagues or whatever it might be. Joe Phillips, always a pleasure. Thanks ever so much for gracing us with your presence yet again. Keep in touch. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Joe Phillips there, political commentator and former frontline spin doctor for the Liberals as well. Hope you enjoyed that and gave you food for thought and reflection. We've still more to come before we go off air, but first, a quick break.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hiya, welcome back. It's 2:29. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak says he's giving it everything to achieve a new deal over the Northern Ireland Protocol, but has insisted it's not done yet. Speaking to the Sunday Times, the Prime Minister said he's hopeful of a positive outcome with the European Union. Describing it as unfinished business, he said it's vital to ensure a return to power sharing in the province. The DUP has refused to form an executive at Stormont in protest over the current Brexit deal. MP Sammy Wilson says the party hasn't seen any proposal yet.
What we do know is that there doesn't appear to have been any deal on this central issue which affects Northern Ireland, and that is the imposition of EU law. All of the problems that we face with not able to get goods from GB, checks on goods coming from GB, and disruption to our economy stems from the fact that we're under a different set of laws than the rest of the United Kingdom, and therefore checks are required to make sure we're complying not with British law but with Brussels law.
Authorities in Italy say that 58 people have died after a ship got into difficulty off the country's south coast. 27 bodies were found on a beach in the southern region of Calabria, and more have been found in the water. It's reported the boat left from Turkey and was carrying migrants from Salamia, Pakistan and Afghanistan when it crashed against rocks during the rough sea weather. There are 81 survivors, with 22 in hospital. Social housing managers will be required to study for qualifications to drive up standards following the death of a 2-year-old boy. Awab Ishak died in December 2020 from a respiratory condition, which was caused by mould at his home in Rochdale. Housing Secretary Michael Gove announced the response after acknowledging that social housing residents are being inexcusably let down. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's get back to Alastair.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed. Now, the V&A Museum, that's Victoria and Albert, have acquired the David Bowie collection and will mount a major exhibition celebrating this modern cultural icon and all of his doings. Now, the greatest rock and roll band in the world, the Rolling Stones, did it themselves, as indeed did the utterly brilliant Pink Floyd. And of course, Gracelands is still a must on many tourists' lists of things to do if they are lucky enough to go on holiday to the United States of America, the former home of Elvis Presley. There are many other examples of it. Black Sabbath, I'm told, as well. As far as Bowie's concerned, more than 80,000 items have been donated to the museum, including his Ziggy Stardust costumes, and you will be able to see them in the V&O's new hub in East London from 2025. When I spoke to the team about this item, saying I wanted to do it, there was only one person absolutely at the top of my list who I wanted to talk to about it, and it's fellow Rolling Stones fan, Philip Kisley, who is a cultural historian and lectures on these matters at the great University of Leeds. Great to see you, and thank you for saying yes. The key thing is the Stones, who are free marketeers and very good businessmen, and I ditto Pink Floyd, although you can have their fallings out over all sorts of things, which may cost them a huge amount of money. I read in the press as well. Academically, is this stuff of such merit intellectually that it's right that a great institution like the V&A should spend millions of pounds on acquiring this collection?
Hi, Alastair. Well, first of all, it's great to see you again and speak to you. Yes, I think it is. I think the answer to that is a simple yes. There's some amazing stuff here. There are 80,000 pieces, and this is essentially going to form the David Bowie Centre for the Study of Performing Arts. Now, I've got real mixed feelings about that. So in terms of the holding, in terms of all of the pieces in the archive, yes, absolutely. You know, handwritten lyrics for heroes, the Ziggy Stardust costumes that you've already mentioned. Lots of materials which are unreleased projects, things that didn't make it to publication. So there's some really interesting questions there about why. You know, what does it say about the artist, but what does it say about the time in which they were developed as well? Why did something in the 80s not make it to publication? So there's lots of great stuff there. The idea of a centre for the study of performing arts, I'm actually not that sure about. Because I've got a quote here. V&A director Tristan Hunt said, "This will be a new source book for Bowies of the future." Now, I don't think real innovators go to museums or top-down establishment education initiatives to develop their rock and roll. I mean, if you think about the tradition that Bowie's from, the rock and roll tradition, Yeah. You've got the Stones and the Beatles, obviously, but also in terms of the real big hitters, you've got the Sex Pistols and Oasis. You can't imagine Brian Jones or Noel Gallagher going to someone called Tristan Hunt and saying, "Oh, well, what do you think about this, Tristan? This is what is this going to be a real innovation?" It doesn't work like that. You know, real innovators, rock and roll heroes, come out of nowhere. You know, they come from poverty often, but they come from local scenes, sweaty nightclubs, you know, back
and also
bedroom. Oasis just, you know, had...
let me just butt in, because it's an important point. I just want to add one thing as well, that if you really are seeking to support the next generation of musicians, not creativity, because I agree with you, it happens. I mean, Can't Get No Satisfaction, I think, came to Keith Richards in a dream, and just woke up and then sat down and recorded it. What state of dream he was in is neither my business nor yours, but we can all speculate upon it. But Paul McCartney, who's made a bob or two out of his own brilliant creativity, he's put a lot of money into a music school, performing arts school, so that people can hone their skills and become brilliant multi-instrumentalists like himself. But that's slightly different to a museum trying to do it.
I think it is. What I get from the V&A is two things. The first thing, which I've already said, I love the idea of, which is a great archive full of just amazing cultural history. But the second thing, it's almost as though it's Guardianistas trying to make pop stars in their own image. You know, Bowie was so incredibly groundbreaking and so innovative on the one hand, but as time's progressed, he's come to represent what all of those people think about. Now, they would never, for example, have a Stones exhibition there in the same way, you know, even though the Stones are, you know, arguably much more important. But can you imagine the explanations on some of the lyric sheets there? You know, because of it. So I think there's an ideological thing going on there, and I think it also relates a little bit to the broader picture of heritage at this time. What we've got is a very cherry-picked thing, and things like, you know, organisations like the National Trust, they handle their British cultural heritage often as though it's poison. You know, they've got protective gloves. So. There's an ideological thing underneath it, I think.
We have to pause it there only because of time. You delivered in spades. I'm grateful. Really lovely talking to you again. And I can't wait to hear what the Glimmer Twins make in their collaboration with Paul McCartney on the new album, which Ronnie told us about here exclusively on GB News. Good to see you. Love to everyone in Leeds, and look forward to talking to you again soon. That's Philip Kisserly, cultural historian and lecturer at the Great University of Leeds, with his thoughts on Bowie on other matters. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with more still to come before we end the programme this afternoon, including I'll be speaking to a former Russian Prime Minister, and you really will not want to miss it. But first, a quick break.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. With the war in Ukraine hitting the headlines this week, indeed we spent a good deal of time reflecting upon it yesterday and the day before with a range of guests. I came off air and went straight in to do a recorded interview with Mikhail Kyazarov, who is former Prime Minister of Russia. He spoke to me a year on from the start of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia to offer us a Russian perspective, but from the highest levels of experience in Russian government. And he tells me within that conversation why he himself fled Putin's Russia and why he still wants to return to change it. He also thinks that Putin is running out of time. His reasoning behind that is absolutely fascinating, as well as his observations on the oligarchs. So here is my conversation with the former Prime Minister of Russia. Mr. Kasyanov, thank you very much indeed for giving us your time this afternoon. In June, you said that you had temporarily left Russia. Are you now a permanent exile?
It depends on how we judge this temporal or permanent. I believe absolutely temporal, because just my vision is that the situation will change rapidly, and I think just few months left until we see just great changes in the whole situation. And I believe in that time you will ask me, and I could predict just when I come back to Russia.
Well, I will come specifically to the political changes that you imply may be imminent, but I suspect, given your experience of high office, you would agree with me that military changes have to take place. What is your objective assessment of the military intervention, now patently outright war and invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, I think just we see already for a few weeks very successful offensive operation of Ukrainian army, and Mr. Putin have nothing to counter, and in fact he very desperate, and that's why he had to call mobilization. Although he understands it's a very unpopular measure, it's very difficult decision for him. He called it say partial mobilization, but de facto it is general mobilization, and that is beginning, as I already previously said, beginning of Putin's end, because of the simple reason. The general mood of population in Russia started to change, even among those people who had a neutral attitude to Mr. Putin, or even those who supported Mr. Putin and supported him in this war. They now started to reconsidering this, because just now mobilization touches every family in Russia, and people asking questions what for before they close their eyes, thinking something just special operation, etc. Our great Putin will win as always, but today they started to asking questions, and propaganda cannot provide them with the appropriate answers.
You suggest there in an absolutely intriguing answer that it's going badly for Putin and that he has very few alternative options. Of course, he has talked quite openly about the terrifying option of tactical nuclear weapons, which prompted President Joe Biden to say on Thursday that we are as closer to Armageddon now than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s. Do you share that assessment?
I share concern and the creation of fear, creation of danger Mr. Putin undertaking. And in fact, Mr. Putin had in his pocket two last cards. One of them mobilization, another nuclear threat. I continue to believe, I could be mistaken, but I continue to believe that Mr. Putin will not use nuclear weapon. If it's the case, I think he already heard from Mr. Biden and other Western leaders that the consequences would be catastrophic for Russia and maybe personally for Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin is not an army general who is prepared to die on the battlefield. He is a KGB agent who should provoke the situation and quickly to escape, not to be responsible for that. Mr. Putin already too deep in this, but he's still thinking how to escape, and he's not going to die. That's why I think he will not use this. What we can see could be also very dangerous, that Mr. Putin's attempts to destroy infrastructure, civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, to devastate the economy further on. Right now, there's devastation already reached like 37%. Economists already just making their assessments. He could destroy it even further on. That's what the danger. That's why I think the Western support by supplying of equipment and training Ukrainian army, that's crucial on this period of time.
As promised, I now want to take you back to the crucial point you made at the top, and that is, as it were, the end is nigh. You've already mentioned the mobilization of reservists, and Zelensky said, we've defeated the professionals, now they send us the amateurs. But the reaction to the mobilization on the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg and elsewhere was very profound. Was that street reaction the start of the end for Putin?
Yes, it's only starting, already starting point. Just we see this social unrest, but it's not much and not enough for that. But it's growing. Only 1 week passed. And I think just that will absolutely just increase of social tension, an increase of social unrest, and that's what we'll see in Moscow at less, because in Moscow mobilization not on such a great level as it's happening right now in the remote regions, when just hundreds and dozens of people mobilized and already just sent to the forests, as they say, for training. But they're reporting that there is no training; they're simply spending their time there. That's another issue of, I would say, unprofessionalism of the whole system Mr. Putin created. Yeah. But talking about just people's mood, that's definitely started to change in considerable manner.
You yourself were the victim of persecution and know many people within your own political movement as well as former political allies when you served in the highest of offices in Russia. Is that persecution, that repression getting worse right now as we speak?
In terms of me, I've never been under persecution. I was under blackmailing and under just television fake just stories about me, but I had never was under persecution. They never produced anything like that yet, because there was no reason to do this, I believe, and they will do it. But for criticism, of course, that is the reason why I left Russia, because just when they adopted this legislation that for criticism you can be put in jail for 10, 15 years. That's what I decided not to take this risk, not to live with this risk with my family. And my collaborators already, just few of them already in jail, and just they looking for they can get just 10 years of sentence to the jail. That is what is happening. That's repression. It's still individual repressions, but it's demonstrative and very tough, and people in shock what's going on.
Historically, any student of Russia will know that the ordinary men and women of Russia do not take well to defeat. Is the perception of defeat on the battlefield something that will further turn ordinary citizens of Russia against Vladimir Putin?
100% correct. That's what I would say. We, as opposition, believe what should happen, because if Mr. Putin not necessarily only looked, but in reality defeated, it means just the whole population would start reconsidering everything he did before, even those as they believed positive things, which I don't think just there was positive things. But for people, that's very important. And just to see Mr. Putin as he made a mistake, as he is defeated, and right now mobilization, in fact, that's already a recognition that his special military operation failed, because just before he said, I will make denazification, demilitarization of Ukraine, and now he calling the whole country, people, please save me, Mr. Putin, save my face, save me, Mr. Putin. And people just started thinking this. He promised something, and now they have to die in the battlefield. They don't know for what.
My final two questions to you are linked. The first is, do you believe that it is more likely that you will be able to return to Russia in a politically victorious fashion, or that the oligarchs, because money is money, will get in there and make changes ahead of democracy?
That's a difficult question. I think just we all would like just that the collapse of Putin's regime would lead to this, for the situation that democratic opposition could again reinvigorate just this its activity and lead peoples and describe to them. And right now, I believe that oligarchs will not be able to foolish people as it sometimes happened in the 90s. Just right now, they have already experienced how just to overcome problems and what problems could raise, and how to overcome them and how to tackle them. That's why I think just, and we all just know oligarchs, not Putin's oligarchs. Putin's oligarchs would be, I would say, immediately diluted or something like that. But actual producers, actual owners of enterprises, that's important. That's important because as big business, it's also part of Russia. We have very just low level of middle class, low level of small enterprises, but big business still plays a considerable role. And I think just we will be able, because just in fact, I and my collaborators, we know all these people, and all these people, in fact, of course, would like changes. They would like to live in a normal country with the European, with the democratic strengths and just real market economy, not just operated by Mr. Putin, by his just unclear orders. Market and should prevent it, should lead this, and state only should regulate but not compete. But right now, Putin have a competition with private businesses. Of course, private businesses always loses.
Sure. And as a former finance minister and prime minister, you are uniquely well qualified to comment upon that. Which takes me to my final question. It's an honour to talk to you and to hear such candid answers. And I see what your vision is of Russia. But having had this conversation with me, do you make yourself even more vulnerable?
Of course, I'm, as a normal person, of course, I'm, I wouldn't say scared, but of course I have attention. That's why just not only conversation with you, but but it is also just very candid discussion. I agree. I just giving my direct answers, because just it's not time just to hide. It's time to show people what this reality is. And just I'm also speaking to Russian media, which on the internet only exist, and foreign media, because so that our friends in the West should understand what's going on. They should understand exact answers and those particular features which I would say belong to Russia, so that to understand Russian reality. We are not a standard European country. We would like to be a normal, but we have some special features, as any nation has. But in Russia, we have specific features because of KGB rule right now. And we should overcome these.
Mikhail Kasyanov, it's been an honour to be a part of that process. Thank you for spending time talking to us here this afternoon.
In the program. Thank you.
The reflections and predictions there of Mikhail Kasyanov, former Prime Minister of Russia. Fascinating man. Now, you've been getting in touch on the topics that we've been discussing throughout the day on Rishi Sunak. Anne says the increase in corporation tax, 25%, is Sunak's choice. He has said that he will make for a fairer tax system. Fairer for whom? Not for British businesses. Fairer for the European Union, perhaps, by making the United Kingdom less competitive. Is this the bitter pill that Sunak has been prepared to swallow to get the European Union make concessions on Brexit deal and on the Northern Ireland Protocol? Neil says, let us not forget that Theresa May did try and foist her sellout Brexit deal on her party. Sunak is going the same way as Theresa May did. on Sir Keir Starmer. Kelvin says, have you noticed that with Starmer it's always about the headline, never the means of getting there? Let's take the Northern Ireland Protocol. Nobody has pinned him down on what sort of agreement he would want to achieve. He just says that Labour would support the government in a vote. What a cop-out. Do keep your views coming in and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are, surprise, surprise, at GB News. Many good interviews today. So to all of my guests, huge thanks for finding time for us. That's it for today from me and the whole team. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News TV and radio. We're back next weekend. For now, bye-bye.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest forecast from the Met Office. Looking ahead for much of the week, it's going to be dry and settled. There will be a few showers at times though, pushing in from the North Sea. And the reason for this is high pressure is in charge. It remains over the UK right through the week ahead, keeping it largely dry. Though with a northeasterly breeze, a few showers will feed in, particularly across eastern areas. Through the rest of Sunday, we'll see clearing skies across much of central southern England and Wales, allowing a patchy frost to form. Northern England into Northern Ireland, southern Scotland. We'll see a bit more cloud here as we move into the early hours, the risk of a few showers. Scotland also seeing those clear skies. Temperatures falling to -7, -8 across the glens of Scotland. Under the cloud, 3 or 4 degrees, and then a patchy frost also under the clear skies in the southwest. Cloud across eastern areas will push its way south and westwards quite quickly Monday morning, turning the skies quite grey, the risk of 1 or 2 light showers. Best of the sunshine holding on across northwestern parts of Scotland. There will be a few glimmers of bright or sunny spells elsewhere, but rather cloudy afternoon to come. Temperatures similar, 7 to 9 Celsius, so generally around average, perhaps if we get any sunshine in the southeast, creeping towards 10. Into the evening and overnight, Monday into Tuesday morning, we'll see variable amounts of cloud, probably more cloud compared to recent nights across England and Wales, meaning less risk of a widespread frost here. Perhaps under any clear spells, a patchy frost forming, staying quite cloudy for Northern Ireland. Clearer skies across Scotland, where temperatures once again falling below freezing. Towns and cities holding up a little bit higher compared to recent nights for the vast majority of us. So it does mean Tuesday will be a cloudier start to the day. Risk of showers moving in from the North Sea, perhaps a more organised band of rain and some hill snow moving into southeast England. One area to watch over the next few days, but largely staying dry. Temperatures generally around average. See you again soon.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
As a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Hello and welcome. This is Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. We've got a packed show for you today. First, our political panel will discuss and debate Rishi Sunak's imminent new Brexit deal and whether Parliament should be allowed to vote on it. And the Telegraph reports that James Bond books will be edited to remove racist references. Is this a sensible approach, or is it an attempt to rewrite history? And yesterday, I attended a protest against drag story performances for children in a local London pub. We'll talk about whether these performances should happen at all. And we'll end with an interview with former school chaplain, the Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall, who just this week lost his unfair dismissal case after he defended the right to question LGBT ideology in schools. So is this a blow for freedom of speech and or religion? But first, here's the news with Bethany Elsey.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 3. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak says he's giving it everything to achieve a new deal over the Northern Ireland Protocol, but has insisted it's not done yet. Speaking to the Sunday Times, the Prime Minister said he's hopeful of a positive outcome with the European Union. Describing it as unfinished business, though, he said it's vital to ensure a return to power sharing in the province. The DUP has refused to form an executive at Stormont in protest over the current Brexit deal. And MP Sammy Wilson says the party hasn't even seen a proposal yet.
What we do know is that there doesn't appear to have been any deal on this central issue which affects Northern Ireland, and that is the imposition of EU law. All of the problems that we face with not able to get goods from GB, checks on goods coming from GB and disruption to our economy stems from the fact that we're under a different set of laws than the rest of the United Kingdom, and therefore checks are required to make sure we're complying not with British law but with Brussels law.
Well, the former Trade Secretary Liam Fox said he would support the new post-Brexit deal if it's an improvement, and expects fellow Tory MPs and the DUP to do the same.
I think the DUP will also be willing to see restrictions diminished, again, in the hope that over time some of them might disappear. I think the hope that the European Union would give up entirely on European law applying to some elements in Northern Ireland is unlikely, given what the British government conceded in the protocol. But we can make progress on that, and I think the